Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another installment of the Acer Predator Training Room. In this video, we've been talking all about vision and wards, a guide for every single role in the game, how to get the most out of your wards, where you should be putting them down. The first thing I should mention when it comes to warding in League of Legends is to strike through that common misconception that warding is primarily a support's job. Obviously, supports have access to that sight stone, but outside of that, there's nothing about warding that should be done just by them more so than anyone else. Vision is extremely important no matter what role you're playing, and I want to show you how you can get the most out of it. Before we move on into the specifics, some general rules for your warding. Firstly, pink wards. They're very vulnerable, so you want to put them down in a spot that you can protect them or where they are well hidden. I'll show you where exactly are some good spots obviously as we move in through the video, but that's just the general gist of it. And the last general rule for warding is the more aggressive you are playing, the more vision you will need. Not only will you need more of it, but you also want to put them further forward to cover your aggressive playstyle. So with that out of the way, let's jump right on into it, starting with the top lane. Here is your general warding guide for that top lane. The two main spots you'll want to focus on are the tri-bush and the river bush. If you are playing on the blue side, which is the left side, then the river bush is a good standard safe ward, but the tri-bush is one you'll need warded if you're playing further up and more aggressive. And of course the same applies, but in reverse if you are playing on the red side, which is the right side. That tri-bush ward is a standard safe ward, but the river ward is one you'll need if you are playing aggressive. To that end, if you are on the blue team, the river bush is a good pink ward spot, and if you're on the red team, the tri-bush is a good pink ward spot. What's also really valuable to do if you can is to put vision down on the enemy top side buff. So if you're on the blue side, on the enemy red buff, and if you're on the red side, the enemy blue buff. This just gives you a little bit extra vision, more time to prepare. You can see the enemy jungler doing his thing in the jungle. And even though this kind of ward gives you more value the more aggressive you're playing, it's still really good information, even if you're not playing particularly aggressive, just to see what the enemy jungler's up to. There are some other good spots for wards, for example, in the lane bushes to prevent lane ganks, but for 95, if not 99% of your games, the ones I mentioned should have you pretty well off. Let's move on to the mid lane now. Mid lane is a unique case because you've got to cover yourself from two sides of the map. So ideally, what you'll have warded are both sides of that mid lane, plus some wards down into the enemy jungle. But of course, there's a lot for you to cover by yourself, so what you should do is ward one side and then communicate with your jungler and get him to ward the other side. And whereas it is an ideal situation for you to have both sides of that mid lane lit up with vision, this is still solo queue at the end of the day, so there's a good chance that that won't happen. But it's okay, you don't need to be able to see both sides. If you light up one side, just play around that, hug that side. Stay as far away from the dark side of mid lane as you can and hug the lighter side. So let's move on to the bot lane now. A unique lane in the sense that there are two players here, so there's a little bit more that you can cover with your vision. Similar to in that top lane, you'll want the tri-bush or the river bush warded. Depending on what side you're playing and how aggressive you're playing, will determine whether or not one is the safe place, one is the more aggressive place, and therefore which one to stick your pink ward into. Outside of that, it's actually quite important to keep your lane bushes warded as well, especially if the enemy support is kind of dipping in and out of them. It's a good idea to keep your eyes on him in the lane phase so he doesn't get up to anything cheeky. And if you're playing versus a jungler that's good at soloing out the dragon, it might be a good idea to stick a ward down on that too. And much like top lane again, if you can get a deep ward into the enemy jungle on the enemy buff, that's really valuable too. So if you're on the blue side, the enemy blue buff, but if you're on the red side, the enemy red buff. Also, if you're on the blue team, if you find the opportunity to do so, I find that it's quite useful to stick a ward down in that little tri-bush behind the enemy tower, you know, the one that's right next to the Gromp, because if you're going to get lane ganked, there's a good chance that that ward will save your life. So if we're done talking about bot lane, mid lane, and top lane, I guess all that's left is the jungle. And there's a reason I left this one till last, because oh boy, And what does the jungler do for his wards? So there's nothing really specific I can say for jungle, because you are obviously very unique in the sense that you're running around the whole bloody map, and you could in theory put wards down wherever you wanted to put them. The short answer of it is essentially you want to ensure that your laners have everything covered, so if they're lacking something, you can make up for it, while also putting a few cheeky wards down in the enemy jungle. So that should do it for the lane phase. But what happens after the lane phase? Where you want to put your wards down then? Well, once you've started taking the mid lane towers, try and chuck some wards down where those towers used to be, because those towers are strategically positioned in geographically relevant spots, so you get a lot of value out of those wards. You also want to keep putting wards down in the enemy jungle, especially if you're grouping and pushing up. Make sure you've got eyes on objectives, especially that Baron after 20 minutes. The worst thing to have happen to you is to lose the Baron because you are too lazy to put a ward on it. The most important thing to say though, don't forget guys, that after the lane phase, warding is everyone's responsibility. Don't be lazy, don't be cheap, buy those pink wards, slap them down. But all in all guys, that should suit you pretty well for warding in League of Legends. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.